Hello and welcome. I'm Julia Manchester, political reporter at The Hill, and thank you for joining us for the Sustainability Imperative, our two-day virtual festival taking a look at how we can keep our planet healthy. We will examine what leaders in the public and private sectors are doing and should do more of to set a new energy paradigm. We will ask what responsible environmental stewardship practice looks like in practice, and we will also explore what individuals like you and me can do to lower our own mark on the planet. But before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Environmental Defense Fund, for its support of this program. We will also be bringing you multiple sessions of programming today and tomorrow. You can watch them all or tune into specific segments. Go to our website, thehill.com/events, for all of the details. But before we get underway, I have a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag #TheHillSustainability. We are broadcasting live and will be taking your questions throughout the program. And if you experience any trouble with the live stream, please refresh the page. That should be a quick fix. And for our first conversation, my colleague Sharon Udison spoke with Dr. Christophe Gabald, founder and director of Climeworks. They've recently opened the world's largest direct carbon capture and storage plant. Take a listen to their conversation as they discuss this innovative technology and much more.
Hi, Dr. Gabald. Thank you so much for joining us today. To get us started, I think that many people watching this actually have no idea what you do, what Climeworks does, what carbon capture really is. Could you give us a very quick summary as to what carbon capture is?
Yeah, hi, first of all, nice being with you today. Well, first of all, carbon capture is not the same as carbon removal, right? So carbon capture is capturing CO2 from a smokestack or a concentrated flue, for example, a coal-fired power plant, or a cement factory. And this is referred to as carbon capture, and that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is carbon removal. So what is carbon removal? We're building machines that suck in air, atmospheric air, and separate the CO2 contained in this air from the airstream. And this CO2 we capture out of the air, we are providing for permanent underground storage. And that's what we do. So we filter CO2 from the atmosphere and pump it in the ground where it will stay forever. That's carbon removal.
I think for those people who are a bit aware about both carbon capture and carbon removal, that some people kind of think that it might be the works of science fiction or that it's unproven, unrealistic. What do you think about that? Is this a realistic solution for the planet? And also, I was looking at I was reading a University of California, San Diego study from late 2020 that showed that more than 80% of 39 projects that have sought to commercialize both carbon capture and storage have actually failed. So I'm wondering what makes Climeworks different.
Well, clearly carbon capture or carbon removal is a reality today. Like, we launched our first commercial operation exactly 5 years ago. That was in May 2017. And when we commissioned a plant in Switzerland, actually sourcing the atmosphere, the CO2 from the atmosphere and providing the CO2 to the Coca-Cola company for beverage carbonation, as well as to a greenhouse. Those were early market applications we have been seeing. Since then, we have further worked on the market, and just September last year, we commissioned an additional plant in Iceland that we are referring to as Orca, which is the world's largest direct air capture and storage plant, permanently removing CO2 from the air. So clearly, direct air capture or carbon removal has left laboratory stage, and it's clearly not science fiction. So it's indeed reality. But on the other hand, we have to stay grounded, and there's clearly a long journey ahead of us, right? Several orders of magnitude we have to scale. But the point I want to make, it's happening out there, and you can touch and feel it with installed assets out there.
I noticed you could actually really touch and feel it. I was watching a video recently about Orca, and you see the carbon actually underground sticks to the basalt in Iceland. And there was a a picture in one of your videos showing that you could actually really tangibly see the result afterwards with this technology.
Yeah, yes, indeed. That's a nice part. So this is the part of our partners, Icelandic partners, Carbfix. That is a company that is specialized in permanent underground storage of CO2. And they, over the last 20 years, they've been developing a process for permanently storing CO2 in the underground. And as you laid out exactly, so what they do, what Carbfix does is they pump CO2 in porous underground rock. And in this rock, the CO2 essentially is turned into stone on the surface. So it mineralizes on the surface. And in such, it's really tangible. Like we have drilling cores of the CO2 storage site where you could see the pristine rock as well as white or grayish parts, which is essentially the mineralized CO2. So you literally can witness how CO2 from the atmosphere is turned into stone.
So if this is in fact technologically feasible, we still have the problem of scalability and who's going to pay for this on a global scale. I know that you guys individually have raised hundreds of millions of dollars to scale your technology, but aside from Climeworks, or in addition to Climeworks as a whole, how can we make this type of technology globally scalable? Is it governments that need to pay for it, private sector?
At the moment, as you described, at the moment it's private sector. So at the moment, or the largest share of it. At the moment, we have essentially private as well as institutional investors investing equity in Climeworks. We've raised a bit more than $800 million as of April 2022. So we just closed a $650 million or 600 million Swiss francs funding round with one of the, among the most renowned technology and infrastructure investors globally, like Partners Group or GIC, Bailey Gifford, among them. Now, so that's on the equity financing side. On the market side, we are currently also having a lot of push from the private sector. Like we do have carbon removal customers like in Microsoft, Stripe, Shopify, Audi, The Economist, or people like Bill Gates or the stars Coldplay are using the service. But clearly, the private sector won't bring us to megaton or even gigaton scale. And that is what climate science asks us to do, right? We have to achieve gigaton carbon removal in the next 30 years. And to get there, we exactly need policy, like we need the public domain. And I'm very, very happy to see, especially in your part of the world, North America, very strong momentum. So we're very thankful for momentum from Department of Energy in the United States, or also recently we heard about developments in Canada, which very explicitly look into direct air capture and carbon removal and support that with very wealthy tools, which clearly will stimulate this whole industry.
Another potential issue that people discuss is the energy required to accomplish all of this. What is the balance between the benefits of removing carbon from the atmosphere and the costs, like for the energy required? Is it possible to accomplish this all with renewables, or like what are you guys thinking about that?
Well, I always feel it's the simple way to put things in a negative light, and you could also put it in a more inspiring or in a positive way, and the way I see it. And actually that's where I'm originally coming from, studied thermodynamics and energy science, and especially renewable energy. Is where like my legacy education is from. And the way I see it is that direct air capture can be a very strong catalyst for the renewable space. Very concretely, renewables are not always available when we need energy, right? So the wind is not blowing or the sun is not shining when we want to turn on our dishwashers, right? So essentially what we have to do, we have to over-dimension our renewable energy system in order to meet our baseload demand. Now, what happens if we over-dimension a renewable system? We might have a lot of curtailment in times when we can't use that energy, right? And exactly for that, climate technologies like hydrogen production or direct air capture can be very efficient energy sinks, right? And that might sound a bit counterintuitive at first glance. However, I do have the impression that direct air capture can be a very powerful tool to strongly expand the growth of renewables, because it can accept energy at times when no one else needs this energy, right? So it can be a tool to enhance grid stability. And consequently, I'm like every 2 or 3 minutes, more primary energy hits the planet than humanity is using every year in the form of primary energy. So it's not that we are resource limited, right? There's more than enough energy to do all those needs. The question is how we can resource it. And the beauty about air capture is that we can put our machines wherever on the planet, right? Like we're sourcing the air from CO2, and we essentially can go there where there's a lot of renewables. So in short, yes, I'm convinced that we can combine air capture with renewables.
Okay, so a good note to end on would be, let's say Climeworks and all the other companies who are having success with these technologies do continue to succeed, and we do continue to scale with the appropriate investments. Do you have any concerns that the growth of this technology would hurt the globe's ability to reduce emissions? Like, would perhaps governments and companies feel that they can just fall back on this technology and no longer have a desire to try to reduce their emissions?
No, I don't have concerns for two very practical reasons. First is cost. Like we are the last resort, right? We are there to remove what cannot remove otherwise. So I'm always saying, or I'm always questioning also when serving partners, are we serving their unavoidable need, right? If you used what we are doing for emissions that are avoidable otherwise, right? We're way too expensive. Like, for example, if say you had a cement plant and you're not striving to reduce emissions or use carbon capture at the stack, but did everything with carbon removal, it might be a very expensive solution for the final product, right? So it's simply too expensive to do it all, right? And the second thing is growth. According to climate science, we have to go to 10 gigatons by 2050, roundabout, of carbon removal annually, which will be probably half nature-based solutions and the other half technology-based solutions. And achieving this growth is very ambitious. It's doable, but it's ambitious, right? So we essentially have to replicate what solar and wind did in 40 years or so, maybe condensed down in 30 years. It's doable, right? But again, I'm repeating myself, ambitious. Now, if we made out of 10 gigatons, suddenly 50 gigatons because we were not reducing CO2 elsewhere, I'm not so confident that humanity, or at least there are no data points in the history of scaling tech that we have shown this growth. And I'm always confident when I see data points in history that this has been done, and solar and wind have shown the growth rates for what we need according to the IPCC. But again, if that was 5 times the amount, I don't have any data points that confirm that, and that may concern me a bit and think we cannot achieve it from a growth perspective. So again, very simply, cost stands in the way of this. We call it moral hazard and the scaling potential.
So basically, all of these solutions would need to occur in tandem to really achieve what the world at large is looking for, I think.
Yeah, exactly. There's no silver bullet. We need them all. We need a portfolio working together, and that's exactly the art to have like this carbon reduction, carbon removal efforts coming together to tackle those 50 gigatons that are currently being emitted.
Okay, great. We thank you for your time today and appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. Very nice meeting you.
And thanks again to Dr. Christoph Gebald and Sharon Udesen. The energy sector is experiencing a period of transition and innovation which will ultimately have a significant impact on sustainability goals. Joining me now is Maria Dunn, the Chief Governance Officer of the energy company Phillips 66. They recently announced a goal to cut their emissions in half by 2050. Thanks for joining me, Maria.
You're welcome. Great to be here today, Julia.
Well, starting off with that, I mean, laying out a plan to reduce Phillips 66's greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2050, excuse me. That seems like such an ambitious goal right now. How does that happen on a large scale, and where do you start when a company wants to set a major goal like that in terms of being sustainable?
Sure, great question. So we started a little bit earlier in time by first setting 2030 targets. And we looked around our company. We are a downstream energy company, so we buy oil, natural gas liquids. We don't make them, and then we make them into other products, or we make them into feedstocks for other businesses or other sectors. And so we have a wide range of businesses, and we looked all around those businesses as a company. And we looked at our business plans and opportunities and said, what can we do in the first step? And we looked at things such as energy efficiency. I thought we heard Dr. Gabald talk about that, carbon capture, lower carbon hydrogen, renewable fuels. That's one of the things that we make. Our products move people and goods. And so we looked at, is there a way to lower the carbon intensity of the fuels that we make? What research is needed, what enablers are needed, and what business opportunities there are. We make a product of synthetic graphite that goes into the anode, that goes into the battery, that goes into the EV system, and lubricants that keep EV battery packs cool and also help greater efficiency in any cars that we drive. And we quantified all of that and added stretch and said, we think on an intensity basis from our most recent normal operations, 2019, we can reduce our emissions intensity of 30% of our manufacturing, what our energy uses are and what power we purchase, and also of the products we make by 15% by 2030. And then when we talked with stakeholders, we heard that sounds great. These are projects-based, they're returns-based, they're additive of shareholder value, they're integrated into our compensation, and they said, great, what's next? And that's really how we then looked to 2050. And we said, what do we see as the drivers? What do we do to provide energy today? And what do we do to evolve? Because we have an expanding global population. And we're going to have, as Christoph said, an expanding energy need. So how can we do that? So we're looking again at greater efficiency, our portfolio, our power purchases, carbon capture, hydrogen changes, et cetera. And we see a need to enable that for policy changes, technology development. I think we talked a lot about that in the first segment, which was excellent. Consumer behavior changes, and supply chain has to be debottlenecked. And that mid-century goal has a lot of stretch in it as well. So we're really challenging ourselves because energy at scale, as you noticed, and you noted at the beginning, is significant. If it were easy, we would already do it, but it's hard, it's a complex system, but we're going to be working on it.
Yeah, and we know that, across the energy sector right now, given the state of the economy, inflation, we're potentially nearing a recession. There's this war in Ukraine that's having an impact on energy prices. I think there's a lot of questions here in the United States, maybe around the world, but especially here in the United States as to why we aren't tapping into, more oil supplies like the Keystone Pipeline, for example. But so from your perspective, I guess, should energy companies and, corporations, non-renewable and renewable, walk that fine line when there's such a demand for cheaper energy right now?
That's a big question. I'll speak to it from our company's vantage point. I don't really know as to renewable companies and others, but I know you have a terrific array this today and tomorrow to talk to that. Big projects are highly regulated. They need permits, they have environmental review, they have community outreach and engagement, and they take time. And so part of what I think in terms of energy abundance, so our company looks at affordable, reliable, abundant energy. And that's, again, what can move products and goods and economies and people. But that takes planning, and it takes permitting, and it takes materials availability and project execution. And it takes talented people who are available, the skilled trades on that as well. So I think we need to think about it holistically, because it's very difficult it's a system, it's an energy system. It's not a spigot or a happening, if you will. We can't just turn things on or off. And all of those drivers that you identified, Julia, reflect the complexity and the scale and the size that can disrupt the markets pretty easily. I think one of the really great things about the energy sector is markets seek balance, and the energy industry comes in, whether it's traditional fuel or electricity utilities, and is seeking to provide the goods so that people and commerce can continue to move and try to equilibrate as fast as we can.
And on that note, just about the challenges companies are facing across the board, I'd love to hear about the challenges that Phillips 66 is facing right now. I understand that with everything happening in the world, with the energy sector changing every day, it's got to really be an exciting and busy time to be at a corporation like that.
I think it is. So we provide products in a world of increasing electrification, which we think is great. There are a lot of tangible, we call them molecules. We have electrons and molecules, and we need molecules. Our phones, our computers, sometimes clothing, shoes. So many products come from carbon-based feedstocks. And so we're continuing to make those today. We want to do it affordably and consistently so people have what they need when they need it. And we're evolving. And so we announced at the beginning of 2021 a new group that we call Emerging Energy. And it has a stated public goal to deliver $2 billion of EBITDA by 2030. And that is ambitious. That, for context, would be about on par with the size of our midstream group or our chemicals, our specialties marketing group, or perhaps even our chemical segment. So really sizable delivery of revenue in a relatively short period of time. Of all the places where we could focus on evolving and expanding our operations, we got it down to 4. And we really looked at where we would have a competitive advantage, where there is value chain extension, and where it is still connected with our core purpose and vision of providing energy. So, and we looked at 4 areas. So renewable fuels is one. Battery technology, as the world electrifies, massive battery storage and battery technologies are needed. Carbon capture, probably more from sources and sinking and compressing and moving and then sequestering. Not so much at this moment direct air capture, but sources. And then hydrogen. A lot of industries and agriculture use hydrogen. And then we're seeing, and we foresee, that hydrogen as a transportation fuel in some areas. We see that in Europe, in the Alps countries, where it's a really good performing fuel. That hydrogen as a transportation fuel is also an opportunity. So those are the 4 areas that we're working on. We have basic research at our research group. And so that's all really exciting to see that expansion and growth of the company with new partners and new business ventures.
Right. And speaking of those partners and business ventures and really how you get to those goals, what type of investments do you think are needed to meet the sustainability goals of the company?
Our sustainability goals are really broad. And I guess the most direct way you can think about it, whether you think of sustainability as people, planet, profitability, and trying to find that sweet spot where the 3 of those intersect, or ESG, environmental, social governance, or sustainability, is to think continuous improvement. And when we do that, we think about it for our current operations. We want to ensure safety, first and foremost, right? We're a complex business. We manage risks. We have layers of risks, and we need to make sure everyone goes home safely every day, and that our products that we make, that are liquids, stay in the pipe, right? That protects people, communities, neighbors, and the environment. So safety is number 1. We gotta financially make money. As a business, we need to be able to contribute and return value to our shareholders. And we need to reduce our environmental footprint, and we need to take care of people, both our employees, our contractors, our visitors, and our communities where we operate. And we think of continuous improvement along all of those areas. When we think of the new ventures, it's going to be new partners that we're doing things with. So we, for example, have a venture with a soybean crushing company in terms of feedstock. We're converting one of our sites in Northern California to be a processor of all renewable feedstocks and make all renewable products. And that's really exciting because on a life cycle basis, those renewable fuels are what's going to lower the intensity of transportation fuels that we talked about and help us reach that goal. So there are new partners who we're working with. We know that there are some areas that are going to be really hard or really expensive or very long to electrify or decarbonize, for example, aviation. So we're working with airlines to identify what sustainable aviation fuels they need and understand more the engine and performance and other equipment. So that's an exciting area to work with.
It really is. It really is
Yeah.
exciting, Maria. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, we only have so much time, but this is such, this is such a good conversation. I really hope it continues, and we'll definitely be watching the progress that Phillips 66 makes going forward. Thank you so much for joining us for the Hill Sustainability Imperative.
You're very welcome. We're delighted to have been invited. Thank you.
Thank you. My next guest is Jason Carney, the founder and CEO of Energy Electives. He's bringing solar power and other renewable energy options to Tennessee. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
Jason, just to start off with, much of your mission with Energy Electives involves bringing renewable energy, like solar, for example, to communities of color. Walk us through some of the disparities that exist right now in the energy sector.
Okay, well, I would just say, there's two sides to the energy sector. There's the operations and doing things like the installing of solar. And then there's also the reception or the consuming of energy. And so from the perspective of solar, on the consumer side, we know that data shows that even if you correct for income and home ownership, that African Americans don't adopt solar at the same rate as other demographic groups. So that's one of the things that I learned as I already kind of understood it empirically from my own experience, but learned that other people are doing great research around this. And from the construction side of it, solar is basically construction. I had a veteran of the solar industry tell me that this is basically a construction business. It's just that we are installing solar panels. So if you look at disparities in the construction industry or disparities in our society as well, solar is just an offshoot or a microcosm of the overall disparities that we have. The only difference is our resource is the sun, and that there is no disparity in the sun. It's available to everyone. And so we have an opportunity, since the resource is just and fair, that we could hopefully try to bring that resource and opportunity to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of, making the industry and the workforce more diverse, how can we get to that point? We see that in other organizations, other corporations and government, for example. We see, many people setting goals, looking to make their workplaces more diverse. But how does it work in this industry, which is, so incredibly niche, I would say?
It is niche. And that is, that's an ongoing question. How do we diversify this industry? Tennessee, in a 2015 study, had, by the Solar Foundation, had 0% African Americans in the solar industry. I believe there may have been a penciling error, but even in correction, it's still a very low number. So I personally believe, I've said this many times, that I think the see it, be it model is going to be the way. I am trying to be an example of someone who is forging ahead in this industry. And I think I think it's fairly proven that if we see someone that looks like us or comes from our culture or just is familiar in some way, that it is encouraging once you see the opportunity and then connect that with kind of a line of sight to how to get to that opportunity. And I think just trying to be an example of someone who is looking to be successful in this industry is one way of going about it. But we just really, it's important to be intentional. And it's important to have other organizations like myself in partnerships. So for your maybe larger firms, you need to partner with organizations of color that are in the industry, so that if you're onboarding someone, that they can see that there's, again, a line of sight to someone that's in the industry doing what they're intending to do, and they may have some familiarity with going to ask that person questions if they don't feel comfortable with the current environment.
So looking at the solar industry in the U.S., from a big picture, how would you rate the U.S. as, expanding solar energy? Do you think we're investing enough in this, or should we be doing much more?
I think the easy answer is that we should be doing much more. I will say that Solar Market Insight reports that we installed 23.6 gigawatts of solar in 2021. And so that makes the third year in a row that solar made up the largest share of new capacity. So I have to say that regardless of the political climate or the business climate, solar seems to have some resiliency, and that we're marching forward in the right direction. But the question is, how quickly can we accelerate? We understand the climate crisis and the very urgent nature of increasing our capacity. And as I said, that number is on new capacity. If we compare it to what's already existing, then it's still a very small number. And so we really need to do a lot more to increase capacity and transition over. The solar tax credit is one way of doing that. And other things that I see the DOE is doing, I think they're becoming very intentional, and hopefully we'll continue in that. And I would just add that if we want to continue to diversify it, there should even be a credit for using organizations or people of color.
So in terms of, how we expand solar energy here in the U.S., I mean, as someone who's not in the industry, working in the energy sector at all, I would think solar energy is so widely available. Why don't we see this, in every home or on every, street in the United States or field? I mean, what are the barriers that are preventing this from happening?
Yeah, two things I think are education and basically disposable or wealth. So I'll just say, like, for the African American community, both of those are a factor. You have the idea that there is a wealth disparity, and so people don't have the disposable income to invest, and it truly is an investment, a very stable investment, a very good investment. But an investment nonetheless. And then two, people just don't know. So as I said before, even when you correct for income and home ownership, African Americans don't adopt solar at the same rate. And some of that is just, they just don't know. And I found that in my business across the board, that there's a lot to be educated about, just as far as how we interact with the utility. Solar itself is very simple. Sunlight hits panels, turns it into power. That power is converted to usable power, and we use it in our homes and buildings. But then when you add the complexities of connecting with the utilities, you've got to educate around what that means to your investment, how to optimize your production you're getting, how to monitor all those things. So, I think we've got to educate a lot more and also do better with paying people more so they have more to invest.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Jason Carney, founder and CEO of Energy Electives, thank you so much for the good conversation. We hope to keep it going soon.
Very thankful to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our first program block for the day. Take a quick break and join us back here at 3:30 p.m. Eastern for our next segment. We're talking trash. You can expect conversations on consumption, waste, and recycling. We'll be discussing what you can do to lower your carbon footprint and much more. I'm Julia Manchester, and I'll see you back here at 3:30 p.m. Eastern.